Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Hell and Gone. Now, Hell and Gone is a 3-issue limited comic book series written by Joe Hill and illustrated by Gabriel Rodriguez and published by DC Comics and IDW Publishing. Now, Joe Hill is also the author of books like Horns, Nosferatu, Heart-Shaped Box, 20th Century Ghost, and he's also the son of legendary author Stephen King. Now, I have all 3 issues of this series right here. Now, these were published between 2020 and 2021, and this series is a crossover between Joe Hill's horror/dark fantasy comic book series Locke and Key, as well as Neil Gaiman's Sandman series. So, if you count this story as canon, this does officially set Locke and Key in the Sandman universe, and technically acts as a prequel to both series. Now, even though the basic plot of Hell and Gone is pretty straightforward, unless you're familiar with the mythologies of both series, you're gonna be completely lost. So, let me just give a little recap or refresher of what both series are all about. Now, Joe Hill's Locke and Key series is about this family called the Lockes who live in this house filled with magic keys that can alter reality. For example, there are keys that can give you superpowers like superhuman strength or make you a giant. There are keys that can allow you to astral project or talk to the dead. There's a key that can change your ethnicity and a key that can change your gender, like change you from a man to a woman or vice versa. There's a key that can literally open up a person's head and you can physically take out certain ideas or memories or put certain ideas in their head. There's also the Anywhere key that could take you anywhere in the world you want to go, and if somebody had all of these keys, they could literally change reality as we know it, and sort of the main conflict of the Locke and Key series is there are demonic forces that are trying to get their hands on all the keys so they can take over the Earth. Now, when it comes to Locke and Key, I've only read the original run of that series, which is set in modern times. However, Joe Hill did a series of prequel comics following members of the Locke family from previous generations. I believe the prequel comics are considered to be the Golden Age arc, and technically Hell and Gone ties in more with the Golden Age storyline. Now, the Sandman series, which was created by Neil Gaiman, that series follows a group of celestial entities known as the Endless, who are billions of years old. They're at least as old as the first life in the universe, but there are certain points where they're implied to be even older than our known universe, and possibly even older than God himself. Now, each member of the Endless controls and rules over a different aspect of existence. You have Destiny, Destruction, Death, who is the literal embodiment of death. She's basically the Grim Reaper. You have Desire, Despair, and Delirium, who used to be known as Delight. But the main character of the Sandman series is Dream of the Endless, also known as Morpheus, also known as the Sandman, who is the literal embodiment of dreams and is the king of the dreaming, which is the dimension where all life in the universe goes when they dream. Now, what the plot of Hell and Gone is, it's set in 1927, and it follows the character of Mary Locke, who of course is a member of the Locke family, and is a character from the Golden Age story arc. Now, a decade prior, Mary's brother Jack served in the First World War, but when he came back from the war, he ended up committing suicide. Now, one of the keys that the Locke family has is the Echo Key, which basically allows you to temporarily summon the spirits of the dead, and it allows the dead to take on physical forms so you can talk to them. And through the Echo Key, they discover that Jack is in hell because he committed suicide. Now, Mary's father is dying, and he blames himself for Jack's suicide, and Mary doesn't want her father to die knowing that his son is suffering in hell. So Mary goes to see this magician or modern-day wizard named Roderick Burgess, who is sort of an Aleister Crowley-like figure. And he's also a very important character in the Sandman series. Now, if you've read the Sandman, you know at this point in the timeline, Morpheus is being held prisoner by Roderick. And basically, Mary tries to get Morpheus to help her save her brother from hell, but he seemingly ignores her. However, he does give her a very important clue. And without giving too much away, Mary manages to get her hands on Morpheus's helmet, as well as his pouch of magic sand and his magical ruby, which allow her to travel into the Dream-In, where she encounters Cain and Abel and Lucian and Fiddler's Green and the Corinthian, who are all creatures from the dream world. And ultimately, the story culminates with Mary and Fiddler's Green being led by Edrican the Demon into the depths of hell, where they come face to face with Lucifer himself. And armed with the magical keys from Key House, they must do battle with Satan's armies in order to save Jack's soul. So Hell and Gone is a solid miniseries if you're a fan of both series. If you're a Locke and Key fan, and if you're a Sandman fan, I think you'll definitely enjoy this. Now, it might disappoint some people how little Morpheus or the Sandman is actually in this story, but again, if they wanted to follow continuity, at this point in the timeline, Morpheus is imprisoned, so technically, he really can't have much to do with the story. And if you actually read Neil Gaiman's original run on Sandman, there are a lot of story arcs in that series where Morpheus hardly even showed up. Like, one of my favorite story arcs from the Sandman is A Game of You, and Morpheus barely has anything to do with that story. A lot of the Sandman stories are more so about how Morpheus's presence affects certain characters, or how the Dream-In affects different people all over the world. Like, there's a lot of Sandman that focuses more so on ordinary people and how their lives are affected by coming across Morpheus or the other members of the Endless. There is a really interesting moment in this where Fiddler's Green looks at Mary and has a vision of Rose Walker, who, at this point in the timeline, hasn't even been born yet. Rose is a major character from the Sandman, implying a possible connection between Rose Walker and Mary Locke. Now, I do wish this series was a little bit longer, and I wish Joe Hill would have maybe explored certain ideas a little bit more. Now, I think he does a lot with the Sandman mythology, but ironically, I feel like he could have done a lot more with the mythology of his own series, Locke and Key. Like, an idea that I think would have been interesting for him to explore is there a connection between the demons from the Locke and Key series and Lucifer's demons? Because it seems like the dimension that the demons from Locke and Key are from is a separate dimension from Lucifer's hell, but is there some connection between the two realms? Because it seems like those demons from Locke and Key are in a different category altogether, because those demons need to possess human bodies in order to exist in our world, where in the Sandman mythology, it doesn't seem like Lucifer's demons really have to do that. So I wish Joe Hill would have maybe explained that a little bit more, or maybe gone into a little bit more whatever connection there might be between Hell's demons and the demons from Locke and Key. The series, I feel like, could have even explored a possible connection between the Head Key and the Dream-In, or maybe even Mary at some point makes a key that can enter the Dream-In. Like, again, I feel like Joe Hill could have done a lot more with merging these two mythologies. But it's possible that either DC or IDW could have limited Joe Hill on how much from Locke and Key he was allowed to throw in here, because Locke and Key is not actually published by DC Comics. But the story does have a really good emotional core, because ultimately it's the story of a woman who is trying to reunite with her dead brother and also give their father closure. Now, the actual story of Helen Gone is collected in issues 1 and 2, but before that, there's an issue 0. Now, issue 0 is not technically part of the Helen Gone story, rather it collects a previously already published Locke and Key story from the Golden Age arc, and it also collects the first issue of Neil Gaiman's Sandman. But once again, I recommend Helen Gone, as long as you're familiar with both mythoses before you go into this. Now, in recent years, both Locke and Key and Sandman were adapted as series for Netflix. I'll talk about Locke and Key first. Now, my opinions of the Netflix Locke and Key series are almost the definition of mixed. I'll say this, I thought it was well acted for the most part. I thought the actors playing Tyler, Kinsey, and Bodhi were perfectly cast. I liked the actress playing the female version of Dodge, but when you see Dodge in their male form, I wasn't too crazy about the actor playing the male version of Dodge. Now, I liked the first season up until the last maybe 2 or 3 episodes, and it really did kind of start to lose me, and you had characters making really boneheaded decisions, and also a lot of it felt kind of watered down compared to what was in the comics, and season 2 of Locke and Key, I just thought sucked. I really was not into season 2, and I didn't even finish the final episode, so I haven't even bothered with season 3, but I know the show has its fans, and if you are a fan of the show and you think I should give it another shot, let me know. Now, The Sandman, on the other hand, I really enjoyed. I thought was really freaking well done. I had a few minor nitpicks with it just because I'm such a huge fan of the comics. Like, there are certain things in the show that I felt were kind of watered down compared to the comics, or there were certain plot points I felt were kind of rushed. I'll admit I was a little iffy on episode 3, I think it was, with Johanna Constantine, because John Constantine is a minor character in the Sandman comics, and in the Sandman comics, in flashbacks, we see a distant ancestor of John Constantine named Johanna Constantine. And in the show, either for rights reasons or just to make the show stand on its own, they do adapt the Constantine storyline from the comic, but they have Johanna Constantine in the John Constantine role. And again, I was a little iffy on that episode, but most of the show was very well done. There's an absolutely terrifying story from the comics called 24-Hour Diner, and the show adapts that story almost perfectly. Tom Sturridge, I think I'm pronouncing that properly, I thought was excellent as Morpheus. He really did capture a lot of the character's mannerisms from the comics. And he also captured what a cold and emotionless bastard Morpheus can be sometimes, but you also see him, much like in the comics, go through an arc where he starts to become a better person. I'm sure some people might nitpick the fact that his skin isn't completely pale or his eyes aren't completely black like they are in the comics, but let's be real, that probably wouldn't have translated well to a live-action series. Patton Oswalt was also really good as the voice of Matthew. Matthew was one of my favorite characters from the comics. You also had Stephen Fry as Fiddler's Green. Again, almost perfectly captures the mannerisms from the comic book version of the character. You had Mark Hamill as the voice of Marvin Pumpkinhead. And I fucking loved Gwendoline Christie as Lucifer, and I thought the Lucifer storyline in the show was really well done, and I'm really excited to see what they do with her for Season 2, because it seems like Season 2 is going to adapt Season of Mist, which I think is the best of the Sandman story arcs. Another sort of nitpick I have with the show, and this is purely a personal thing, but because the Sandman comics, or at least Neil Gaiman's original run on the series, ran from the late 80s to the early 90s, for me, that's the feel I get when I read those comics. They have such a late 80s, early 90s feel to them, and I feel like if I were the showrunner for a Sandman series, or if I was doing a Sandman movie, I would set it in the 1980s. Especially because the comics have such a late 80s goth rock aesthetic, and I feel like setting the show in modern day, you kind of lose that a little bit. Now, because we had this Sandman and Locke and Key crossover in the comics, there's been some talks of potentially crossing over the two shows, but I don't think it's anything serious right now, so only time will tell. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Definitely check out Hell and Gone. Definitely check out both the Sandman comics and the Locke and Key comics, and definitely check out Netflix Sandman.